Good evening. My name is Don Ficken. I'm with the Library Telescope Task Force, and we're glad to have you tonight. We've got a fun program called Library Telescope Hacks and Fixes. We'll be talking about how you can make a telescope a little bit more patron-friendly. We've learned a lot of things over the last year. I have some folks joining me, and I'll introduce them as we get a little bit later into the program. As you may know, if you've been following us for some time here, we've had monthly programs. Last month, in fact, we talked about navigating the night sky with Stellarium. We not only taught you a little bit about how to navigate the night sky, but we also talked a little, gave you some demonstrations about how Stellarium, which is a free tool that you can get on your desktop, how it can really help you learn your way around the night sky. It's both a web version and a downloadable version, a lot of fun. Next month, on September 15th, we'll be talking about Library Telescope Star Parties. Star Parties are starting back, even though I know that some areas of the country are still challenged, but they're a great way to promote the Library Telescope program and get some hands-on training. And tonight's program, we'll be talking about Library Telescope Hacks and Fixes. These are really changes to the Library Telescope that'll make it hold up a little bit better under patron use. And all these programs, by the way, are available on YouTube. If you go to our librarytelescope.org website and then click the YouTube button at the top, you'll be able to access our library. I have a lot of stuff out there, not only these YouTube programs by month, but also a lot of helpful videos about how to use the library telescope. I want to just talk about one thing that we just talked about this last month in our library telescope task force. We're setting up something called the International Library Telescope Observing Week. This is a new idea, and the idea is that each year during the first week in September with the first quarter moon, we'll celebrate the library telescope and encourage libraries to use telescopes to observe the moon. So this year, even though we haven't had much of a chance to promote it, we're talking about the period from Sunday, September 12th to Saturday, September 18th. And so tell your libraries about that. Start talking about this. We think this will be a great way to emphasize and bring attention to the Library Telescope program. All right, so if you're not familiar with the Library Telescope program, I presume that many of you are if you've joined us tonight. It's a program that where a library owns a telescope that's loaned out to adult patrons, much like a book. It's been very, very popular. It was started in 2008 by the New Hampshire Astronomical Society. And what they did is they set up some instructions and they put it on their website, and organizations just started borrowing the instructions, using the instructions, and the program just exploded throughout the country. In fact, right now, this is probably not near all the actual real locations. We know there's at least libraries in 44 states. We know there's libraries in Canada, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and we think in Chile that have this. There's certainly well over 600 participating locations. I'm guessing at least 1,000 plus telescopes. So there's a lot of stuff that's been going on for quite a long time, and we're trying to get on top of this really with the Library Telescope Task Force and really make this thing go next steps. Our task force meets each month, and we have a couple goals. One is we want to grow the program, and sometimes growing the program simply finds out that there's a library that we don't know about that has one. We have a nice map that tells where all the telescope programs are that we know of, but you can help us. If you have a library that's not on that list, you can let us know about that. We also want to share best practices. This is an evolving thing. This is a fairly new idea still, and we want to get this better and better all the time. We have something like 40 plus members that share best practice. Some get together physically, not physically, but virtually each month on Zoom, and some simply emails back and forth and share best practices. But typically they're pretty experienced managers, so we get really a lot of great feedback. We have a lot of activities. We have our Tom Lynch is on here tonight. He's running a Facebook page. We're closing in on 3,000 followers. We have a website with clickable maps. You can go to your state or your country, whatever else. We have YouTube channels, monthly programs like tonight, and a resource library that's really good. And really a lot of what we learned about in our task force is really the foundation of what tonight's program is built on. It's, in other words, ideas that we've learned out over time with task force members. And I also have to draw personally a little bit from our Metro St. Louis area. I've been involved in that since 2014. We've grown this program to 170 library telescopes, 125 binoculars. We've got 4 different clubs at university involved. And so that's been a very big, important part of it. And it's kind of one thing to say how many telescopes we have, but here's actually a picture of one of our bills. This is not just one of our bills. It's actually just one of several bills. This is a build of 50 telescopes. We had 60 people in a room building these things in one day. And this is literally two sides of the aisle where you can see the telescopes lined up that are getting ready to be shipped to various libraries throughout the metro area. So with all those experiences added on to what I'm learning from the Library Telescope Task Force, we've got a lot of ideas to share. So about tonight's program. So there's so many ideas that are going on all the time, and I'm not even going to begin to hit maybe the surface of really the ideas in our monthly best practice discussions. There's many contributors, and we were laughing right before we started tonight, and there's many opinions. You can get two different opinions. Well, I like this and I don't like this, and they'll argue all day about this. I will say none of these ideas are really mine. They're really everybody else's, but that's good. We have a lot of ideas. That really tells me there's not necessarily one answer to anything. You don't have to go completely all the way one particular approach, and it's not like only one thing works. If I express an opinion tonight, it's mine alone. I've actually tested a lot of these stuff, even though I didn't think them up. And so I'll give you maybe my perspective on it. Now, I will have to say that neither the Library Telescope Task Force nor the Astronomical League officially endorses any particular hack or fix. We like some things over others, but we're not going to say we haven't really bulletproof tested this. And to the extent that I've tried to provide the instructions in a librarytelescope.org/hacks page, which we've created on our website. But not everything's out there. If I'm telling you to make up a little label that says do not touch, I don't need to provide the instructions out there for that. I think you get that. Now, we will have questions at the end. We've got several good experienced managers here, including Mark Stovage, who's one of the founders of the program. So we'll have some stuff. So if you've got questions, put them in Zoom in the chat or in the Q&A area, or put them in Facebook, and we'll get there soon. Okay, so tonight's, obviously I'm doing the presentation. I'm from the St. Louis Astronomical Society and the Astronomical Society of Eastern Missouri, and I got helpers, which is Mark Stovage from the New Hampshire Astronomical Society, Chuck Sims from the Astronomical Society of Eastern Missouri, and Tom Lynch from the Amateur Observer Society of New York. Okay, so this is the picture of an unmodified telescope. Actually, it's pretty basic, pretty simple, but it's really designed for a single family use. The dials are easily turned, which is what they're supposed to. Parts are easily lost. And basically, if you think about this, like the red dot finder is supposed to come off. And go on. Yes.
Excuse me, I don't think we see your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on.
Facebook page.
Okay, hang on a second here.
There we go.
Sorry about that. There you go. Thank you. It must have popped down there. Have you not seen it for a while?
Nope, we missed a picture of the big build too.
Oh, okay. Let me go back real quick here. I'll just do that. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so here's the big build. Thank you guys for telling me that. There's got a couple screens here. So here's a picture of the telescopes from the first order. One of the orders has 50 telescopes. And here's where we were actually building them. I think there's something like 60 people involved in that one. And here's actually two different rows here of the telescopes ready for shipment. So sorry about that. All right, so anyway, the librarytelescope.org's hacks page will have really a lot of the stuff that we're really talking about here. So, so the helpers tonight are Mark Stovage from the New Hampshire Astronomical Society, Chuck Sims from the Astronomical Society of Eastern Missouri, and Tom Lynch from the Amateur Observer Society of New York. Okay, so here's a picture of the unmodified telescope. And this is, as I said before, it's designed for single family use. The dials are easily turned, parts are easily lost. In fact, the red dot finder is made to come off for storage. If you were to use that as it is, it would work fine, except these things will happen. And of course, it won't be functional for very long. And we want really the patron's first experience with a telescope to be really a good experience. The typical modifications, and there's actually a modification instructions on that /hacks page that talks about the stuff. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. You can see the little numbered yellow kind of stickers there. You're putting on lenses, your ropes, and you're putting on extra battery packs with AA batteries on them. You've got decals and camera bags and replacing collimation screws. Those are all baseline stuff. You can get all that from the instructions from the /hacks page, and it's a pretty good place to start. And that's where we're going to start tonight, is because by starting with that, we've learned that some things work better, some things don't work so good. So the troublesome areas that we found in at least the St. Louis area and what I've heard from the task force are several. And I want to start by just making a quote, a statement on this. overall, the telescope has held up pretty well despite a heavy use. So when we say there's some troublesome areas, these are not like major issues. These are just issues that annoying. They're probably more annoying sometimes than really anything else. And we just want to make sure, or we have to do more maintenance that we'd really like to. At least in St. Louis, I think for the most part, we fixed every single telescope. If there's been something wrong, we've been able to fix it. But they start with the viewfinder, which seems to be the top of my list. It seems like every time I get a call, somebody's got a problem with the viewfinder. They can't, it's backwards, the batteries are corroded or something going on. So we'll go through that list. There's problems with the focuser. The focuser's not on right, it's just not working right or whatever else. There's problems with eyepieces, and there's sometimes problems with getting the mirror collimated. And what that is, if you're not used to collimating mirrors, it really helps you see an image sharper. It aligns the mirrors to where you get the best image possible. And if that's not done right, then let's say you're looking at Saturn, you may not be able to get a good view of Saturn's rings. And there's some other miscellaneous issues. Sometimes it's just maybe better marketing techniques or suggested ideas. All right, so let's talk about the viewfinder. So this is a basic viewfinder. It's got an on-off switch, really simple. It's got a red dot, which you can see over here, that if you look on the right-hand side, you look through the red dot through the finder, and when you see the moon in there, and that dot's on that moon list, for example, when you go look at the eyepiece, it's ready to go. It's aligned with that, and you can go look at the eyepiece. It should be there if it's everything set up. So you've got an elevation right here, which I'm showing right here. And that means if it's a little off, then you can move the elevation up and down. And azimuth means you move it kind of left and right so that you can get that dot where sometimes it's a little off. You want to get it right on there so that you don't have to keep fishing for it whenever you're looking for it. So that's the basic idea, okay? Also, it has a button battery that when the button battery's in there, it's pretty good if you're just like a consumer. It'll probably last you a while if you make sure that you turn it off. But for the most part, my personal experience is that I had one of these when I first started. I'd forget the thing and I'd leave it on, and next night the battery's dead. So the idea is that maybe we ought to figure out a way to make the thing last a little longer. Now, so here's a typical list of troublesome issues: dead batteries. The red dot doesn't work all the time. It's on backwards. It's lost. There's a misaligned red dot. In other words, it's not on where it's supposed to be, so I can't find the thing exactly. The batteries are corroded. I can't see the red dot, or I've lost the little base screw that holds the whole red dot finder on to the scope. Those are very typical things that we encounter. So the old school starts out with, you know what? All I'm going to do is put a sticker on there, and I'm going to tell them, don't forget to turn off the red dot finder. I can buy batteries in bucketfuls. So, hey, I'll just give them a lot of batteries. If it turns out the battery's bad, they can just put another one in there and they go for it. I don't need to make any changes to it. And you know what? That's actually worked for several people just fine, especially smaller libraries where they're able to check the library telescope, make sure the thing works on and off, and they got some batteries. But you can buy these things and really for fairly inexpensive. Now, the original hack was, which is really written in the instructions that are the original plan, was to put a battery pack on the side. And that's actually pretty clever because it puts two AA batteries on there. And I'll go to the next page here. It actually puts some AA batteries in a box, and it tapes it on the box. And they kind of, if you can see what they do is they put some soldering to where it goes in there, and it kind of hooks it up to where you really just change the AA batteries. That's worked pretty good. And I will tell you, at least in St. Louis, we've had people fighting over, they really want to solder. They love to solder, and you know, they're going to fight on who gets to solder or not gets to solder. But then I've also talked to libraries that says, you know what, I don't like to solder. I don't know anything about solder. I don't know anything about electricity. So sometimes not always the best idea, but at least with St. Louis, we kind of like the AA battery idea because it's sure made it work out a little bit better. Now, the problem is, and by the way, all those instructions are actually, again, in the original instructions on the on the hacks page. The problem that we really encountered, at least in St. Louis, and I think other places as well, is that the soldering wasn't always done that well, or the way that if you look right here, it had a little cover, and whenever you try to tighten it down to keep a good connection, that connection was not always good. And so what we do is we get calls from the library, and we'd find out that the switch seems to be intermittent. In other words, the red dot would come on and go off, red dot would come on, go off. And what we found out is that sometimes the switch was bad, and that was actually pretty common for a little while. There's some bad switches, but more often it turns out that the way that the thing was connected was bad. So one of our guys came up with a technique to completely change the way it's soldered. And he's going to direct solder to where there's really no problem with the connections being loose. You're going right to the connectors. And when you solder those in there, and it's worked, since we've had that done, it's worked well. We've had no problems with the intermittent red dot switches, unless it turns out it's actually the switch itself. And that's turned out to be not very often. All those instructions to do what we're talking about here is actually in a couple page PDF with pictures and everything. And if you go to our hacks page, you can get that. Okay, so another really common problem we have is we get a call and either the red dot finder is in a bag somewhere on the side of his telescope, or it's on, as it turns out, it's backwards. We arrive and we say they can't see the red dot. Well, it turns out the whole thing's backwards. So one of our guys came up with this clever idea. I'm going to put a hole in the red dot finder base and in the clamp, and I'm going to simply zip tie this thing on there. Now, it might come loose, but it's not going to get lost in the sense that it's not going to get completely off. And we've actually had some pretty good success with that. We found that that holds the red dot finder on there pretty well. And we haven't really lost them so much now, unless they intentionally are taking them off, which is always possible. They can cut they can cut the zip tie. But, it's really worked pretty good. Okay, so when you get to the red dot not being properly lined up, okay, one of the problems is that people will say that's supposed to be the on and on switch, which I'm highlighting here. And here's the up and down, to change the dot kind of like up and down, if you will, and then left and right. Well, people, when it's dark or when they're looking at the thing, they don't know which button to move, and they start turning other dials instead of the on and off switch. And what they do is they simply adjust the red dot to the wrong spot, and then they don't know how to get it back. So the point is that you can fix that by simply, in this case, we simply put a white dot and tell them to go to the thing with a white dot. And that's what you need to turn, and don't turn anything else. Now, some people have taken this a little bit further and they go, well, I'm going to put an off switch, and then I'm going to put a left right switch on there. And then I'm going to go to the back and I'm going to put an up down switch. And that becomes a little bit more instructional. That works pretty good, actually. I mean, for the most part. Now, the only downside of that is that that's pretty good if they're looking at the telescope before they go outside. But sometimes when they get outside, they can't see all those stickers. So, but it's still a lot better than simply guessing which of the three dials should I really turn. Okay, so some of the new thinking going on is that why do we even need a red dot finder? I mean, if you think about it, we're looking at typically with our library telescope, some of the bigger objects like the moon, or maybe Saturn or Jupiter or a double star or something like that. Why don't we just use, let's say, a piece of PVC pipe? In this case, we take a piece of PVC pipe and we put a little screw in it. And what you do is you look through the pipe. And when you look through the pipe, let's say the moon's behind there, you simply line this up and put the little tip of the screw on the moon, the middle of the moon, and you go look at the eyepiece and, hey, you know what? You'd be surprised. It actually works much better than you might think it is. And let's say it's a little off. Well, you can make it certainly a little bit of adjustment in the base, the way the screws are set up. For the most part, people allow, if they know it's a little left and when they look at the viewfinder, they just make a little bit of allowance. It doesn't really work too bad. So what this does, it solves a problem. No dead batteries, no intermittent red dot, not going to be on when backwards or lost, or no corroded batteries. And you know what? You can't see the red dot. Not a problem, because you're just looking through the hole. Now, Mark Silveridge, who's one of the ideas, came up. He says, oh, by the way, make sure to blunt the tip of your screw, because that screw can be pretty sharp. And you know what? Kids will put their finger in there trying to touch the top of that. So make sure that you kind of blunt that really good before you put it in there. All right, so another version of this, and this is not the best image, but it's where you take PVC pipe, and what you do is you take another section of PVC pipe and you cut it out to where this little piece gets glued on. And if you get it just right, it'll actually fit into the little channel where the red dot finder fits, and it'll work. It'll actually just slide right in there, and you can button that thing down. And you don't have to, well, you need to put a screw or something there as kind of an aiming device. But it's a pretty clever, Mark actually showed me a really good side view, and this is not the best view, but it's really pretty clever, actually. It's just taking simple PVC pipe, which is, by the way, pretty inexpensive. If you go out and replace the red dot finder, you're going to find that, there's probably $10 to $15, each, plus batteries. So you're starting to get to where it's a pretty low maintenance kind of thing. Okay, so then one of our clever folks said, you know what? I don't need all that PVC pipe. I got a 3D printer. I'll just make one of those things. And so in this case, a 3D printed tube finder was made. It fits right in there. In this case, it's white. It does all the same things, no batteries, no red dot problems, not on backwards lost, all the kind of stuff that goes like that. Very simple, adds right on there. I would say Mark Stobridge, and we can talk about this later, says he likes these tube finders because they give you a really nice wide field of view. And that means that people can find this. What's really nice about these kind of things too is they're very intuitive. You might not be able to find the red dot if you're looking at a red dot finder because you don't even know what it's supposed to look like, but it's pretty understandable to look through a tube to look at something. It's just very, people kind of get that. You don't have to even hardly explain it. They just kind of get that really quickly. And that 3D file is also available at the Hacks page. So actually, this is one of my favorites right here. Is that it's just kind of a I call it a saddle finder. It's a 3D saddle finder. You print it out. Again, it's got a real simple connection to the base. It's got two small holes on each end that you look through to line up to whatever you're trying to look at. I had actually received a couple of these. I don't have a 3D printer, and one of them was white and one of them was red. And when I found the white one, whenever it got around moonlight, it would actually kind of glow a little bit and interfere with me looking through the dots, through the holes to find something. The red one is pretty good. I could look through that pretty well, and I didn't see a lot of issues with that. I like that red dot finder. I did notice that my head had to go a little bit lower than I would have expected to the tube. And that was more just kind of getting used to it. But once I got that figured out, I like it. It looks elegant. It's something you can print. I think Chuck said, who's on here tonight, maybe you could print this thing for less than $1 or something like that. And it's just very intuitive. Anyway, I think that's a very good option. And again, that 3D file is available on the Hacks page. So this is one we've had a little bit of problem with lately, where we have the base of the red dot finder has two screws that hold it on, and we go in, we get a maintenance call, and guess what? One of them's gone, and we have to go find them. One of our maintenance guys found this. He could get brass ones, and they were a different color, but they're like $3 or $4 each or something. They're hard to get. But anyway, we have a 3D file that you can just print this thing, and I haven't tried it, but it sounds like it works pretty good. It'll just go right on there and screw right down, and that's a good. And again, we've got, and as you can see right here, here's the item, and here's where the base is that it screws on. We'll be replacing this guy right here, which is a silver screw, which is okay. So anyway, that 3D file is also downloadable. So let's talk about the focuser. So one of the problems with the idea of putting a zoom lens on is that whenever we put the zoom lens on, we take away the thumb screws, which are the screws that are holding on the zoom, and we put little button things in there. And that's to make sure that the people don't take the zoom lens out. The trouble is that often we tighten them too much. And when we tighten them too much, they'll crack this, what's called a visual base. You can see on the left-hand side here, there's a little white thing, and that is really in the actual case on the right-hand side, it's a black version, so you can print in whatever color you want. And whenever you put the black thing in there, then that's what the zoom lens will go into, and it'll replace that. When we had some, we had a lot of them crack actually, and it's very difficult. It seems to be very difficult to get replacements. Whenever we went to our vendor, they want us to buy an entire focuser. It's hard to get just that piece of it. So the 3D visual back is pretty good. Now I don't have this here listed tonight, but one of our guys actually used plumbing materials to actually fabricate that same thing, and he didn't really make a 3D version of it, but that actually works pretty good too. But the point is, there's a 3D file. If you go out to our Hacks website, you can download that and you can get that printed as well. Okay, so another problem that we've had, this is very common. I actually had this at the Gateway Arch last weekend. What happens is that you get a very enthusiastic youngster, and they're trying to, you've got the thing almost in focus, and you tell them just move the focuser a little bit in or out, and you'll get a little bit sharper. So what happens, right? The 8-year-old or 10-year-old, they just rack it all the way in, rack it all the way out, rack it all the way in, and they're just so highly energetic that what happens, they keep turning even when they get to the end of the focus. And what happens is that the little plastic tube that you see with the gears on it, it's actually plastic, and those gears get stripped out. and pretty soon you got a problem. Those little focuser tubes are hard to get. And so we still haven't quite solved the problem, but how we have solved or at least slowed down the problem is in St. Louis, and there's this gears right there I'm highlighting, is that if you put a little screw, in this case, a little stop, you'll find that it only turns so much one way or the other. And instead of putting the pressure on the gears, it actually just stops by hitting this little stops against the focuser. It won't let it turn any further. So it won't turn, it gets enough to be able to get a good view of the sky and get a good focus, but it doesn't go too much one way or too much the other way. And when we've done that, that's actually stopped the gears being stripped. The only problem we've had is that if you have to get near focus for something, let's say you're doing something in a conference room somewhere and you want to look at something really close, you won't be able to do that unless you loosen up the zoom lens and then allow it to get a focus a little bit closer. But it's been something we've used in St. Louis, and it's really slowed it down. We hope to get a better tube replacement one of these days, but that's not really been figured out quite yet. Okay, eyepieces. The original telescope, as you probably know, has a couple eyepieces. Basically, a novice, you might say, starts out completely backwards. They put the low millimeter lens into the telescope thinking that's where they should start, which turns out that's the most powerful lens you can get. So they can't find anything because it's magnified too much. And so, and then of course, that's 75 power the way it worked out with this telescope. And the other one was like 26 power. So what we've done, which is the original hack, was to take the two lenses, get rid of those, and just put one zoom lens on. And they can literally, if you lock that in, you can pretty much give them a pretty good range of magnification, and they don't really have to take anything out. Plus, they don't lose it. So they don't get the wrong eyepiece because they can just make an adjustment until they can see something, and they don't lose them, which is a really pretty smart idea. Okay, so again, the original hack was you take the thumb screws out, which is on the left right here, and then you put what's called button head screws in there, and that's how you make sure they don't come out. Now, and that's worked good, as I mentioned before, except I think sometimes we tighten them down too much and we mess up that visual back, which is what the lens goes into. One problem we had just a ton of problems with is the little rubber eye guard, which is right here. It's designed to let your eye get close, but not too close, so that you're not brushing your eyebrows up against, or your eyelids up against basically the lens, and it gives you about the right distance. The trouble is this isn't really made for like library production use. That rubber eye guard just falls off, and pretty soon we had like dozens of telescopes in St. Louis that didn't have that little thing on there, that little rubber eye guard. And the original instructions said use some glue and whatever else. We used glue. Glue would deteriorate over time, or we'd put too much glue. We actually had sometimes people put so much glue trying to glue this thing on that it actually went down inside the zoom lens. We had all kinds of problems. So the clever thing that the folks came up with is this. They simply said, look, let's get rid of all the glue and let's just use tape. Now, there's an argument in our group. Do I use electrical black tape, or do I use Duct tape, which has got a bit of a cloth fabric to it? Either one seems to work fine. Once we started putting tape on this, it seemed like we quit using, basically we stopped losing rather this rubber eye guard. It's really slowed it down pretty well. And of course, it'll get frayed over time, because when you put the eyepiece cover on there, it'll fray the edges of it a little bit, but that's okay. Tape's cheap enough, and it really seems like it actually has fixed it pretty well. Another completely different version of this is actually pretty clever. Mark Stobridge, who's on here tonight, came up with, what he does is gets foam flooring tile, and he makes a little circle out of it and then punches a little hole in there. And then he, instead of the rubber eye guard, he'll actually put that onto the eyepiece and put it on there with tape. And what that does is it gives you the correct distance, but it also does one other important thing. A lot of times, if you watch children do this, they get to the eyepiece, and because it's got a fairly wide field to look through, they're having trouble finding the center of it. In other words, they don't know where their eye is supposed to be. This makes the hole smaller, and that means they have to look just about the right spot to be able to see this. So Mark has really come up with this pretty clever little thing. I've used it. It looks pretty nice. And then he puts it on there with some rope and some covers. I don't have a particular description out there in our hacks file, but it's pretty simple. It's a pretty straightforward thing. And I think I might have the image out there, but not the actual instructions. But anyway, I think you'll find that actually is pretty cool and works particularly good for young children. Okay, so the mirror. This is always a fun one. The mirror, as you look at the mirror when the telescope comes, if you look at the side, you're going to see it has all kinds of stuff over there. It's got all kinds of just very tempting dials to turn and move and whatever else. And the idea is that if this is collimated correctly, if in other words, those dials are moved just like they're supposed to be, you'll get a really good image to the telescope. If you're not, if they get twisted, then we wouldn't necessarily know that, as a librarian, for example, or as a person running the program, you'll say, wow, it's all out of whack. So one of the options right here is to simply replace the screws with these guys right here, which is basically they're bolts that have to be used a wrench. And if that happens, then they get locked in. And by the way, they typically don't go out of collimation because that's pretty good. And you'll find that, wow, that actually works pretty good. So the problem is that you have to take the mirror apart. And a lot of people say, I'm really worried about taking that mirror apart. I don't really want to do that. So some people said, forget that. I'm just going to put a plastic tube on the end. And that plastic tube will keep the little fingers away. And all I got to do is take the plastic tube off. Guess what? It works. And that's not bad. Another one is that this is kind of old school. And one of the Tom Lynch is on here tonight. He can tell us. He simply says, forget that. I'm just going to put a sign or a label that says, do not touch these screws. And he swears it works pretty good. And I think in our program, that might be a challenge with 170 telescopes. But I think if you're on top of a library, that might work pretty good. We actually have found, surprisingly, that when we try to collimate it, it turns out that center dot right there is not always centered. So one of our members made up a tool to recenter that donut, if you will, to make sure it's proper so that when you do collimate, which is a process where you need that little circle, it'll work pretty good. So if you're not checking for that tool recentering, that donut recentering, you should do that just to make sure that it is actually centered on your telescope. A couple of miscellaneous issues. We actually have a card. You can go to our hacks page right here, and you can download that. If they do the QR code or use the librarytelescope.org/get started, it'll take them right to a resource page with instructions on how to use the telescope and several videos. That's a good way to get people started on operating the telescope. One of our members says, well, I like the Audubon Society guide pretty good, but that's probably 10, 12, 15 bucks, and I think I can do better. So he's actually made one that you can get for free, and you can download that from our hacks page. The moon map has been around a while. It's not really that particularly detailed, and there might even be a little bit of issue with the orientation based on the telescope we're using. So there's a new version of the map out there that some people are using instead of the old one. And you can also download that image from the library telescope hacks page. Some have decided, hey, look, we need some good table displays. In other words, put this thing right here where you can tell people to check it out in 14 days or whatever their period is. There's been pictures of telescopes. If you don't have a telescope, we want the telescopes loaned out. So sometimes a picture works pretty good, just to show them what it is. And some of you have taken that a little bit further. They make a cardboard version of this, and they cut it out. Instead of having the telescope literally sitting in the library, they just have a cardboard version. So this happens to be a Meade, but it's still about the same concept. So that's really what I have tonight. All the stuff's out on the librarytelescope.org/hacks page, except a few of the things. I'd like to really thank particularly Mark Stobridge, who's been a terrific helper on this. And then in St. Louis, Chuck Sims, who's on here tonight, and John Bury has helped me a lot. And then we've got some other folks here that Tom Lynch, of course, has been a great help on the Facebook and others. We've got Facebook, as you can see here, website. And then if you want anything on the YouTube, just go to our website. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I know I run a little bit long here, but guys, you want to talk a little bit about anything that you want to mention here? And let's see if there's any questions too, by the way. I need to see if I can get, you see any questions out there, Chuck? Or let's see if I can get some questions on the Zoom here.
No, just seeing someone saying they'd like to buy a few, and that was back when you're on the finder scope replacements.
Yeah, that's actually somebody that we can probably get one to them.
Yeah.
Okay. What about, do we have any questions from Facebook, Chuck? Do you see that at all?
No, I do not.
All right, you guys have you've been around this a while. Do you want to comment briefly on this about anything that I've talked about here tonight that you think that you would like to add to what I've already said?
I will say I've had a lot of fun just playing with the 3D printer, and both doing existing files that we found, like the visual back and the saddleback finder, but then just creating new ones, which is some of the other 3D prints that you've shown tonight, just playing with that. So that has actually just been a lot of fun to do. So this just a great program to do things like that for.
So we have one question from the group about how are you sanitizing the scopes on return? Do you know anything about that, Chuck?
Well, we use, especially at the height of the virus, we were using a 70% alcohol compound. What is it? ISA. I can't get the name right for the type of alcohol. But it was a 70% solution. We would spray it onto a paper towel or some kind of cloth and just kind of wipe the lens and around the lens. Didn't spray the alcohol on there directly. And that's exactly what, the CDC said would, help kill the virus, and it worked really well. Now I keep it around now. Most people, haven't been asking for it, but it's always available if someone thinks they need that.
Yeah, I think there's also a policy, at least in some of the St. Louis libraries, they simply let things sit for a while. In other words, the virus only lasts so long. So they had policies of maybe it's 3 days or a week or whatever it is, so that they don't check it out as often, but I guess it's safer at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're correct. I was in there thinking of the star parties, but yeah, the St. Charles Library is the same way. I think they have a 3-day policy when it's checked in. It's 3 days in the library before they check it back out again.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the star parties next month because it is a challenge. I know that in many cases we've done projection scientific systems. Sometimes we've done Zoom, for virtual kind of stuff. But it's a constant challenge, I think, as far as that goes. So, do we have any other questions here from anybody in the group as far as that? Anything else you guys want to mention or add on to what we've said so far?
I will say, go ahead, Mark.
With the little, I don't know if you can see what I'm holding up.
I'll spotlight you here so it'll make you a little bit bigger.
All right. These are the little donuts that I've been making for not just replacing the eye cup, but also putting it into the eye cup like that. That gets rid of that head orbit that you were talking about with little kids, but also for cleanliness. You can take a wipe and just wipe over that and not go anywhere near the glass. It also keeps all but the most probing of little fingers from, poking in there. Is there glass in there? And it's held on nicely by the tape that we use to secure the eye cup because that just pinches it in a little bit.
Okay, that's good.
Where those things come from is this. This is a hole saw, and instead of the center pilot, there's a little Forstner blade in there, which cuts a very neat hole in the middle. And I can take one of the interlocking tiles, flooring tiles, and just make hundreds of the things out of one sheet. And that's just how they're cut. So anyway,
yeah, somebody just reminded me, I have a cover for the eye cup, which I forgot, somehow I got out of the presentation, but the 3D file, in other words, the little cover that goes on there, yeah. So we've actually got one of those that's a 3D printer file. Somehow I got it out of my presentation, but the 3D file instructions are actually on the HACS page. So we tend to lose those break, those are challenging, and somehow they got out of my presentation. But that is really a nice print because they're sometimes hard to find at least one that really fits well.
Yeah, and then there's also a comment out there about the eye guard that Mark was just showing, trying to do that with a 3D print. So that is probably something I will probably look at here.
Cool.
Yeah, it would work.
Yeah, it wouldn't be as comfortable because yours is a nice soft. So depending on how close the kids get their eyes, but I think it would still work.
No, I think that would work fine. You just make it a little bit bigger here so that it grips tightly to the eye cup, and it never really hits anybody's eye. So you could make it out of granite probably, and it'd be fine.
Right.
That's a wonderful idea. That's likely much easier than my more mechanical way.
Yeah. And also just talking about the red dot finders and the issues with them. I had to fix a telescope yesterday where the battery pack was pulled completely off. The red dot finder is on backwards. So I replaced it with one of these nice, saddle ones. We've got a couple of them out in the field, and I've been using them with the star parties with the libraries. And, they've gone over really well. The red dot finder is more accurate. I will give it that. But this one is, still there. You can find everything. And just the fact that there's just no maintenance on it. And I think it's about 75 cents to print this. It really is cheap.
So we're going to wrap up here, Tom. Tell us about your do not touch my dials, my collimation screws.
I get a lot of grief about that. It's the lazy man's approach, and that's exactly where I came from, where I got it from. I can remember the first time I did one of the telescopes. I modified it. You got to cut the holes to put that cover on the back, right? So I drilled the hole in it. I had measured and everything, and I thought I was a good 3/4 of an inch away from the mirror. When I looked in, I was less than half an inch from that mirror. So if I had been a little bit slower, I would have hit the mirror. So that scared the heck out of me. I was like, man, I don't want to do this again. So I came up with that idea, and I've got 11 libraries now, probably 15, 16 telescopes, and we finally had a problem with it. We finally had somebody who didn't look at the video that showed you how to use the telescope, and they decided that you have to look at it through the barrel in the back. And what's this piece of cardboard in there? There's a black piece of cardboard. Well, they managed to get that out, and then they still couldn't see because that's the bottom of the mirror, right? So then they took out the screws. Yeah, well, that's what they told me anyway. So when I got there to look at it, we got the cardboard back in, the screws were in, and I looked at the collimation. It didn't seem to be too bad. So, but that's the first time that's come up. I was afraid that the screws would get loose and then get lost, but that hasn't happened either. So it seems to work, but it definitely is the lazy man's approach. And that really just goes to show there's a lot of ways of doing these things. It all doesn't have to be done the same way. There's a very good plan to how to do it. And if you're comfortable doing it, great, do it that way. But if you're not, and you can improvise a little bit, if it works, that's fine. Because not everybody is all, so great with tools and things and soldering and drilling and such.
So somebody asked, do you actually put a label in the back too? Or is it just on the side? The one that I showed was actually on the side. Do you have one in the back as well?
I don't, no, it's right on the side there. That's where I put it. And so, yeah, and as I said, it really hasn't been a problem yet. It may be someday.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up here, I think, because we've gone a little bit over our time. I try to keep them about 30 minutes, but this was one of my harder presentations I've done because there's so much stuff going on out there, so many great ideas, and I'm just trying to pull all this together. But I want to leave you guys with a couple thoughts. The first thought is that there's a tendency for someone that's going to launch the program to look at the instructions and say, if I don't do everything on there, this won't work. And what I'm hoping you're really seeing is that there's a lot of ways to go about this, okay? And you don't really have to have everything done. You just have to try it for you. And the telescope in the raw sense will work out of the box like it is. I suggest that you take away the two lenses and put a zoom lens in there, for example, but you can get away with quite a bit without doing too much to it. The other side of it is that I'm pretty sure that if I get two astronomers, they're going to argue with one way is better than the other way, and there's not going to be a solution possible. And so I think you have to just do what works for you. I've been working with telescope, with libraries, and I know Mark has done as well, and you'll see all kinds of them, and they come up with the craziest things sometimes, but if it works for them, that's all you have to really worry about. That's all we really care. So I think that if you want to get into this program, I would not try to go completely exactly what says there. If you don't want to mess the mirror, don't mess with it. Just put a tube on or just put labels on there. If you don't want to change out the battery pack, don't worry about it. Just use the nickel sized batteries, or maybe do the 3D printer like we've got right there, which is a simple idea. If you don't want to put camera bags on the side, that's fine. There's other ways to go about this, but you can get in the program without a particularly lot of work. And I think it'll work out pretty well for you. And the good thing is that we've discovered in St. Louis, at least, that pretty much everything is fixable. I mean, not to say that it's not everything is fixable, but for the most part, it's a pretty rugged little telescope. It's not built for this, but it's been working out pretty well. So with that, I'm going to sign off. I will be putting a copy of this or a link to a YouTube version of this sometime out there tomorrow. I'm actually going to put the presentation out there as well into the Hacks page. I'll make a PDF of the presentation. I do apologize that apparently I've got it on 2 screens here, and I'm looking at a screen that's got notes on it, and apparently the screens weren't up for you guys to see, but you didn't miss much anyway until we got the thing corrected. So I'll put that presentation out there. And thanks for joining us tonight, and come back next month. I think it's September, is it 15th or something like that? We'll be talking about library telescope star parties. It's a lot of fun, a really great way to promote the telescope program, and that hands-on experience is just all the difference sometimes whether it works or not with a particular library. So thanks to all you guys here, and to all the task force and all the folks in St. Louis that have been making this work. And Chuck, you've been really helpful a lot today. Been sending me a lot of 3D files. I really appreciate that. And same with you, Mark and Tom and others. So thank you so much, and have a great evening.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.